Hi, everybody. This is Tracey. Today, I would like to talk to you about finding the right therapist. When you've been abused by a narcissistic person, the journey is going to be long to recover. You've got to look at the patterns of your own life. You've got to look at your own accountability. And that's not victim blaming. That is understanding what you didn't know before so that you can now know it and move on and not let it happen again. But choosing a therapist is not easy. It's not like you can go onto your insurance website and say, I'm looking for someone that specializes in narcissistic abuse. It's not there. So you have to be able to search out the right person. And today I've got a therapist from Manhattan in New Jersey, Babita Spinelli, I love her name, is going to talk with us about how to choose a therapist. What kind of questions should you ask when you interview someone? And how do you make the most out of understanding who you should hire? So let's welcome Babita Spinelli to our show today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tracey.
What made me so excited to talk to you is that you are a psychologist,
Psychotherapist and psychoanalyst.
okay. So tell me about yourself.
Sure. So I am born and raised New Yorker, but globetrotter. And I did my psychoanalytic training at the National Institute for the Psychotherapies. I've been in private practice for about 10 years. And I have a practice in Manhattan, New York City, and I have 2 offices in New Jersey.
Wow, you must be very busy.
I am. I love what I do. And I am. And that's why I sort of expanded. And I, also run some groups, etc. But my practice focuses on individuals, couples, and teenagers.
Oh, okay. And how did you get started? I mean, obviously you're trained, but how did you get started helping the victims of abuse?
Yeah, so when I was in my psychoanalytic training, we worked with a diverse population of individuals. And during that time, I was very interested in working with individuals who are survivors of narcissistic abusers, having had my own experience around it. And so, based on all of my academic research and my clinical experience, I was given those clients. And then over time, that became part of a niche in my practice, just very organically. And because it was very near and dear to me to be able to help survivors and to make a difference. And so, and then after that, it just sort of, those clients gravitated towards me, and I built my practice with a lot of individuals who come to me either knowing or not knowing.
And when somebody comes to you, like when I first learned about narcissist abuse, I had just gone through a horrific divorce and a boyfriend. I had no idea what narcissist abuse was. I just knew things were wrong. So is that how some of the people come into your office, not knowing?
Yes, that's a great question. Very common. They come in not knowing. So they could come in with just saying, I feel like something's not right in my life. I'm in this really bad relationship. So they might recognize that the relationship is bad, so to speak. I just don't know how to handle it. Maybe you could teach me how to communicate with this person. Or they might come in saying, I have really low self-esteem. I really want to feel empowered. And as we are unraveling their narrative, as we're going through their journey, a recognition of there's some symptoms here that reflect that this person is involved with a narcissist. And we start to get into what is taking place and do some, I would call some psychoeducation of the fact that this is what's going on in their life.
And I know a lot of people make the same choices. It's repetitive that you're not just with one narcissist in your life, but sometimes it comes from your family of origin or, your first relationships. And then it becomes so familiar that you don't even know that you're in the same thing again.
Yes, I mean, we repeat what we don't repair. So if
Mm,
we continue in that pattern, we will continuously be drawn to the narcissist. That is sort of what we know, becomes our normalizing pattern.
mhm,
A narcissist can be very alluring. And so once one has been with a narcissist, you could continue that route until you break the cycle, until you actually are in therapy and seek some professional help. The other aspect of it, Tracy, is if you've come from a family where, let's say, you've had a narcissistic mother or father, and so you've never really experienced, when you've had that experience, how should love show up?
mhm,
What is a healthy relationship? What are boundaries or non-boundaries? How should I be treated? And so you take that with you, and then you're carrying on in your life, and that's what you end up being drawn to. Again, you don't know any better.
mhm. And it's very much unconscious because we're not like going out to a bar and going, I'm going to look for the most evil person here. That you're looking for someone that's charming and all of the characteristics that we all think about, that make a perfect mate. They can pretend to be. And I think that's the biggest thing is when we meet someone, we tell them our story, we tell them our past and what we're looking for. And a narcissist morphs into that, right?
Yes, we've got the different masks of the narcissist, right? So they become who we want them to be. Also, there's a sense of the narcissist has a way of reeling an individual in, and it's almost very urgent. So the intensity is very huge, and I think the victim feels loved, taken care of, affirmed, right? They're sort of held on a pedestal.
Mhm.
And I don't mean to make sweeping statements, but those are very common, common signs, right? Those are very common behaviors.
Right.
The other part is if someone is a trauma survivor or they've come from a place of trauma, they also are very open to receiving someone who's a narcissist because they
Why?
may not, well, they haven't healed from their trauma. There may be vulnerability.
Mhm.
Um, they, let's say they've been a survivor of, let's say, a victim of childhood abuse.
Mhm.
um, Again, they're very prone to being open to being controlled. They're sort of used to sort of accommodating and pleasing. They're used to blaming themselves for things. And so the person that's been a victim of trauma might be much more open to a non-healthy, narcissist.
Mhm. That makes sense. You mentioned some of the red flags along in that sentence. What red flags do you see when people come in and they don't know and they've just spouted out, whoop, 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 this is what's going on? Are there red flags that you would say 1, 2, 3? Watch out for these when someone's getting into one of these relationships.
Hmm. So it's interesting because in the therapeutic relationship, we are quite careful before we get to that conclusion. However, we're also very aware that there's a spectrum of narcissism. So you've got someone with narcissistic behaviors, and then you have the true narcissist abuser.
Mm-hmm.
And so when a client comes in, some of the red flags that are like, okay, this is leaning towards someone who's in that spectrum is, first of all, being controlling. Is this person extremely controlling? Second one is, does this person have no room for my client's subjective experience? Does this person not make any room for that person to have feelings, or that their feelings are completely discounted?
Mm-hmm.
The next one is, are they shamed? Is there often in the relationship that there is the narcissist shaming them in a very humiliating way, either in public, even within the home, or in different situations? The next one is, there's no boundaries. There's a lot of boundary violations that are taking place, and there isn't an understanding or respect that this other individual has their own way of being, has some self-respect, has some boundaries. So that's another red flag. The other one is a sense of grandiosity. The individual often reflects a care about status, a self-centeredness, a generosity that's about them, that it's feeding something within them.
Mm.
And perhaps a sense of entitlement also. It's always about what they are entitled to. Perhaps the narcissist might exude that they are victim, that whatever you're doing is your fault, that you have no idea what they're feeling like. So those are just some of the red flags.
And those are really, really valid things that so many people don't look for. You don't think, I mean, I'm shamed, but the reality is you as a therapist can sit there and identify the standard behaviors of someone that is shamed, where they're holding themselves in a specific way and they're afraid to take their own chances and their own feelings, because if they do, they're shamed.
Yes, it's very true. And often the victim has no voice, so it's often even hard in session for them to articulate and feel like that they can own their experience,
Mm-hmm.
because they're so used to not owning their own experience or their own feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the journey in our process is when there's a recognition of that, that they're able to say, yes, this is what was going on in my relationship, and I have a voice and I can express this. It's okay to express it.
Yeah, I think I wish that we were taught this earlier in life, that we had choices and that we
Yeah.
can say no, and this is healthy and this is not healthy. I wish that I had been taught that, but being raised from a narcissistic family, they weren't going to teach me healthy boundaries. They weren't going to teach me healthy relationships because they were the abusers. And, if I had an inkling, besides the fact that we weren't the normal family, if I had the inkling that there was something I should be like, oh, that's bad, but I didn't. And so I became a victim over and over again.
Yes, and that happens often. So just to normalize it, right? That happens often. And again, because of the lack of education, because of the modeling, because of the teaching from our families, one can continue to repeat the behavior until finally there's a moment where there's either a therapist or someone else who's in a role that can say, hold on a minute.
Mm-hmm.
You've been victimized over and over again, and you continue to be drawn to that
Yeah.
in a space of empathy. Because one thing is also, the narcissist is not deeply empathic. And so, in a place of empathy, the healing begins.
And what does therapy look like for a survivor of abuse?
Um, well, I would say that there's a lot of different phases, and I would call it like there's maybe a 3-phase recovery, as there would be even if someone is going through addiction withdrawal or divorce or anything, right? It's kind of very similar approach. I think the first part of it in the journey is the recognition and the facing of it and the giving voice to it. And that takes some time to feel like you can trust even the therapist across from you to be able to talk about it, and some sort of acceptance around what has happened, and an acceptance around if there's repetition.
Mm-hmm.
The second part of it is understanding some things like the red flags. Um, and so that you are aware, even in your day to day, this is what I should be aware of. There's some individuals that are continue to be in the relationship. So
Yeah.
the second part of it is, what are my red flags and what are my coping mechanisms? And how do I manage this? And what do I want to do about this? Are there decisions I want to make with regard to continuing this relationship, and how do I do that? And if not, how am I going to speak to this person that I'm recognizing now that I'm either married to, in a relationship with, is a narcissist, and what am I going to do? I
Mm-hmm.
think the third part then is, once that is addressed, is really healing and recovering from what's taken place. The fact that there was a trauma that has happened,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's a space of healing, and then there's a space of empowerment, and that's reinstilling trust in relationships, reinstilling trust within yourself, trusting yourself that, like, you know what, I'm not going to repeat this, right?
Yeah.
Feeling empowered, enhancing self-esteem, going into that place of saying, being the person that you are, feeling like you could be in your own skin, and
Mm-hmm.
going back out there in the world, empowered and restored and rejuvenated, so that you can now sit in the space of even a therapist and say, "Oh, I see it."
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that's actually like exactly what I was thinking would be what the plan was. Certainly, boundaries for me were something I didn't know about and didn't know I had a choice to say no. As a people pleaser, empathic, whatever you want to call me, I, I, I was not empowered to set a boundary until I started learning about all of this and my own healing. Um, do people come to you and they want to save a narcissistic relationship? They come in there and they just think that, hey, I want to heal her or him. I can do it. My love will change them. I know that's a very big thing that victims go through.
Yes. And they've come in that way in either relationship therapy with one, or they come in that way in actually couples therapy.
Mm. And can a narcissist change?
If they're willing to really do the work, and it's a journey,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to be completely open to looking at their roots of their narcissism. How did they become narcissistic? What was the abuse that took place in their lives? Are they willing to look at the abuse that they're actually um, giving or doing, that they've victimized, the people that are around them, that they've kind of reeled in?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is hope, but it takes time and it's a process, and they have to be open to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy though.
No, I would imagine. I would imagine healing, no matter where you are, is hard enough. But healing and changing your life patterns, like a narcissist has always done the same thing, just as we as victims always enabled, always empowered. So it's definitely got to be something that I think isn't very often that a narcissist
No,
gets
it's
treated.
not.
Yeah,
It's not often.
yeah.
It's not very common.
Yeah, I know. I have a lot of men that visit my channel, and they have been, abused by female narcissists. What can you speak to them? Because they always seem like, you forgot us, we're here.
Yes, I think for men, and I do work with men also, um, there's a lot of shame, even more so. Not that there isn't shame with women, because they feel like they've been uh, submissive. They don't understand. There's a lot of confusion.
Mhm,
But for men, oftentimes they're drawn to the narcissist because of the narcissistic mother,
mm,
and a part of them feels that they can that they end up being drawn to this because the unconscious wants to heal the relationship that they had with the mother that perhaps was never repaired. And
mhm,
so for them, their journey is, one, the recognition of where it comes from in their relationships with women and the narcissistic mother. And then two, being able to say, you are no less than, right? It's
mhm.
like there's a lot of like ego, I think, that comes up,
Right.
and also fears, and also what is the noise going to think of me? What is everyone going to say?
Mhm.
And how have I allowed this? So
Yes.
there's a lot of those feelings, I think, that come up when I work with men. They come up with women too, but I think just to focus on what comes up powerfully for men.
Yeah. I think that the men that I work with as well, the stereotype of them being weak because wait, you're a 6'2" guy and your wife was 5 foot something. You're trying to tell me she's abusive? They have a stereotype that because they're bigger or for whatever reason we compartmentalize their role of a man, and when they are being abused, whether it's
Yes.
emotionally or physically, I mean, the ones that I know that have been physically abused, it's so embarrassing and so hurtful for them to admit that.
Yes, and it's interesting you say that. That comes up powerfully in the divorce groups that I run,
Mm-hmm.
where in terms of for men, the embarrassment and the shame because they feel like, am I believable?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so are people going to think that this, big guy is being abused or was abused? And in their recovery, in this divorce recovery group that I have, narcissism comes up. And that's often very powerful in terms of what's raised by men when they've been, victims of a narcissist and
Yeah.
they've divorced them. So there's this grieving process, of course, as well, and this relief, but also a lot of processing around that, around weakness, and then
Absolutely.
around feeling like they can go back out there.
Oh yeah. I can see that. So that's a really helpful thing. What I was hoping to ask you is, people come to my channel, come to my website, come to my podcast, and they want to know, how do I pick a therapist that knows about this? Because they really don't put it on their billboard and have it on their door. So what are some questions that they should be asking to know if someone's a qualified therapist in this area? Because there's so many therapists that don't even know about narcissistic abuse. What should they be asking before they
Mhm.
make the choice that might be the wrong one?
Sure, that's a great question. I think, first of all, they should kind of do a consult with the therapist, and the questions they should ask, for example, are you familiar with narcissism? Can you tell me what you know about it?
Hmm.
And they should, can you share with me, how do you approach if someone, if I were to come to you around therapy, around my relationship, I believe I'm with a narcissist, how would you approach the work? What is your style? Or even just say, how do you approach therapy,
Hmm.
right? Once they've defined narcissism, if they can define it, right? And then what,